International Women's Day tomorrow, and we know it's all about women, obviously. And this year's theme is Press for Progress. Press for Progress. Why do you think it's important? And what does that mean to you? Press for Progress. What does that actually mean for you as well?
The meaning behind this year's theme is about gender parity, so equality for women. And obviously we've got equal pay reporting in the UK. The deadline for that's approaching soon. It's at the beginning of April.
Yeah.
But if we take it wider, International Women's Day was set up for women all around the world, and we can't forget that global context. You know, I'm speaking to you as a woman of Kenyan origin, and I've got an Indian origin.
Yeah.
And often in the UK, people say, why do we need an International Women's Day? Why can't it be an International People's Day? Why do we have to have this?
Yeah.
But what we need to remember is, while we're generally okay in the UK, we have issues. We do have the gender pay gap. We do have high levels of domestic abuse and child poverty and other things that impact women more severely than they would do men.
Yeah.
On an international level, we have women who are not allowed to drive. We have some of our women that don't have access to a toilet and face being raped on the way to go to the fields or something.
Yeah.
So we can't forget about that global dimension.
Yeah. I mean, I totally understand what you're saying. Like you said, I'm from Kenya, so I've seen it both ways. I've seen it in the sense that in the UK, we're more advanced in the sense that there is a feeling of there is a value being valued as a woman. But I'm not saying in Kenya we are not, but I'm just saying there is obviously a difference. There's a cultural difference depending on where you live and how you're valued and how the society sees you at large. In certain professions, this is what I wanted to talk about. We find that in the UK specifically, there's some professions where, although women are being attracted into the organization, you find that they're not retained or the advancement is not as the men's. An example I can think of is the PR profession, which I'm into currently, or even accounting and finance. We find that certain professions still have a problem with women advancing to the level where the senior management or even making partners.
Absolutely. And yesterday we had several speakers at an event I went to for International Women's Day, and one of those was Barclays, who along with Lloyd's and others have just published their gender pay reporting. And they've provided some narrative around all of that to say our issue really is at the lower levels, but then also at the higher levels, because they have in certain departments, for example, corporate banking or international banking, still huge gaps, and especially when you think about the bonuses that people get at those senior levels. So there are those sectors. Then you might look at others like construction, where it's more of a male-dominated industry anyway. So I think we know and accept that, but some of the things that are being done to tackle it are still, they're doing the same things and trying the same things. And my frustration often is, you're talking about diversity and inclusion, but you're not, it's almost like a tick box exercise, because unless you actively go out into communities and do that hard work to try and reach in and bring them in, they're not necessarily going to come to you. And a great example yesterday was really interesting for me, because it was the diversity manager from the House of Lords. And when you think of the House of Lords, you think, well, how have they got jobs? And apparently they have 200 jobs, which include librarian, archivist. And what was really exciting was they now have a female doing a job that's been done by men for 650 years, and it's called the Gentleman Usher of the Black Rod, which is such a fun outdated title. But essentially it's the person in the House of Lords that has the honour of knocking on the door with the big black stick. They were determined to get a woman after all these years, 650 years of having a man in the role. And they have achieved that through a lot of effort. It's the former chief executive of Wimbledon Tennis. And she's come into the role. So that's an example of an organisation you wouldn't think of really out and going into communities. And one from the past that I worked with was Yorkshire Water. So in Bradford, which is very ethnically diverse, you know, one of the more ethnically diverse cities I can say in the country. But they were still struggling in terms of meter readers. Most of those were white, most of those were men. And culturally, to be able for the meter readers to go in, sometimes the male meter readers weren't allowed into homes. So some of the Muslim households in particular, where the women couldn't let a strange man enter their house.
Yes.
So it was a proper business case for getting women and ethnic minorities to build up that trust and enable some of those things to happen. So they work closely with grassroots organisations to do it.
Yeah.
And it's about that listening and understanding, because we don't, you and I have talked about this before, haven't we, about the assumptions that people make about you as an African woman or me, an Indian woman. So
the unconscious bias.
Share with me some of those again.
So I think it's to do with, I would think in certain professions, I mean, when we talk about unconscious bias, which is one of the things we discussed, where people don't realize they're doing it. And maybe for the purpose of this video, maybe we could define it as your preferences. Unconscious bias is where you have a preference of people who look like you, sound like you, are like you. But obviously in organizations, that's not the case, because it's a diverse place. You can't just work with people who sound like you or look like you. An example is where you go to work and you've gone in for an interview and the place is not welcoming. And by that I mean someone like me who walks in, I have a difficult last name, and it might be that the minute you walk in, nobody bothers to pronounce your name right, and you've come in for a job, or you've even got the job, but they try and shortcut your name so that it sounds more English. Now, I know it's difficult, it could be a challenge for them, that's a given, but then to have that as someone who's just come into an organization, your skills and talents have got you through the door, you've got your qualifications, what you really are looking for is that welcoming culture in an organization where you can actually be yourself, be your authentic self. When your authentic self, you're able to contribute positively, because you don't feel, first of all, my name is strange, I look strange, or you don't feel like that is a barrier. And you're able to express yourself. I think one of the examples we talked about was about a friend of mine, and she'd gone for an interview, and she's in engineering, and she's she's done it for 10 years. And she's very eccentric, and she'd worn a very bright yellow, her glasses are very bright yellow, and then she goes in for this interview, and halfway through she's told, you might actually be able to get the job if your glasses were not so yellow, so bright. And then she walks out thinking, wait a minute, first of all, you shouldn't even be saying that. And it's about my skills. If I had darker glasses, or if I had different makeup or hair, that doesn't affect my ability to do the job. And sometimes people confuse being unconscious bias with first impression.
I completely agree with this. I think it translates to hair, natural hair. But the name thing, I'm speaking at the Chart Management Institute conference on Friday. And I'm going to talk about this because my professional name is still Anj, but actually my name is Anju, which is only one additional letter. It's ANJU. And I recently shared an amazing video by a lady called Uzur Maka. And she had gone home one day, age 13, and said, "Mum, can you call me Zoe?" And the mum said, "Why?" And she said, "Because, people aren't finding it easy to say my name." So in other words, white majority. And her mum said, if they can pronounce Tchaikovsky, if they can pronounce Michelangelo, they can pronounce your name. And that is so true. And I remember once I had a chief executive who came back from a Chinese business briefing, and he said oh, do you know that Chinese people, they have a British name and an English and a Chinese name? And I said, yes, I do, because I've got a friend Wei Fing, and you know, the English name is Susan. And he said, oh, well, you could have a Chinese name. So tell me what is difficult about Anj. It's 3 letters.
I know, Anj, that is just so strange. The funny thing about my last name is there's a footballer who had that last name.
Right.
So if you think about it, in the news, on the news, sorry, should I say, on the news, or when they're talking about this footballer who was very well known, the name was easy to pronounce.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's because, I think it depends on the context. And that's why we need to say, if it's something that there's sort of like a buy-in from the leadership of the management says, we're looking for diversity. And we know that means people who come in, that will have foreign names. That starts from the top, it trickles down to the shop floor. Don't you agree? So if you have someone who is a footballer and has a strange name, but it's easy to pronounce on the news, it's easy to they say it, but when you go in for a job interview, they're struggling, and then later on at the end of the interview, someone says, oh, I knew someone who had that last name, then they pronounce it correct. There we go.
But I actually think there's a difference. I think in small to medium organizations, that point stands, but I've seen a lot of larger organizations where the top leadership, the chief exec or very senior directors have great values and are completely committed to this. And there's a lot of diversity at the lower levels, but it's the grey area in the middle where local authorities are a great example. You know, I know the chief exec in Leeds City Council and the leader, and they've got a real commitment to this, and they genuinely want to do it. And for example, coming back to Press for Progress and gender pay gap, there is no gender pay gap at the top of Leeds City Council, and they've worked really hard to improve it at the lower levels. They're looking at living wage and all that kind of thing. But what you have in the middle are managers, middle managers, who have been in post maybe for 20, 30 years, and they've worked their way up in that organisation, and they've become institutionalised. So even though you get fresh leadership, you've got people doing things the way it's always done, and you've still got this attitude of protectionism or you know, just recruiting in the likeness that we were talking about earlier. So what happens is progression, because it gets stalled at that middle level. So there is no talent pool to recruit upwards to the senior levels, because most of them are at that lower level or lower mid-level, and not senior mid-level, if you see what I mean. So we're talking about the NHS, we're talking about government departments, if we're talking about even some of the big banks or BT, this kind of middle manager block prevails. So I feel that institutions need to do a lot more there to be able to create that talent pool so that people can progress higher, because something is going wrong, and it's unless, and even if you're recruiting from the outside, even if you're trying to do that, your recruitment may be from your competitors, but if they've also been doing the same things, there's a very limited supply of people at the right level to even recruit. So it's the real barriers, and especially in sectors where there are skills gaps. So tech is a great example, coding. There are very few coders in general, never mind women and never mind ethnic minorities. So we've got some issues in the UK that we need to solve, combined also with you know, our ability to recruit people from Europe or people coming from further afield, which has been quite tricky due to some of the quotas that the government has imposed without looking at the bigger picture of skills gaps and future planning. I don't think they've thought that through very well.
I think also, other than attracting people from ethnic backgrounds and women, there's the retaining them. Say for instance, you obviously get into a job, and there is on that level, entry level, there are many people ethnic minority, but what tends to happen is, as years go by, it's retaining, keeping that talent, which is very important, because when you keep that talent, you then can promote that talent. Someone who's been with you for 5 to 10 years, knows the business inside out. She could go away and have a child and come back, but those are the barriers we're talking about. As women, we've got barriers where in certain places I heard you're asked if you're looking to have a baby because you're going to be out, or if you've got, and this burden falls mostly on women, elderly parents, where you're sort of like almost like a carer, caring for your parents. And it's that respect. I think we're looking for that sort of equality where I've still got my skills. I've worked in this organization for 10 years. I might take a year out to have a child, or I might take time out to take care of my parents, but I still have the skills, and I'm probably more experienced than someone who's coming in from the outside. I mean, in certain countries, I'm not quite sure, I could check this, but I'm sure in certain countries I've had, like Sweden, where if someone goes out, if a lady goes to have a child, and she still maintains her position, and if there's a promotion that comes up when she's on maternity leave, she's actually called in for an interview. Now, on a personal level, that's, for me, I've actually left a job to go have a child, and an opening came in. I wasn't even considered, purely because I hadn't left the company. I was on maternity leave, so I wasn't actually called in for the next level, which I would have been. So what is when I went back, someone who was my junior ended up having the role. I would have ended up taking over the role, which I would have happily been able to do. Then I went back. I was his junior, and and only because for that time I wasn't there physically to actually even do the interview. I wasn't invited in for an interview.
No, but that shouldn't be happening, actually. That shouldn't. But what happens in reality, even though in terms of policies that shouldn't happen, in reality, I know so many women that have either been, the roles being made redundant, and it's just been changed slightly so that somebody else can be recruited, or they've faced some kind of demotion. They haven't physically been demoted because you're not allowed to do that, but actually they've been told, we've only got part-time hours available, things have changed, so they've almost been forced out that way. But there's another issue as well, which is I'm glad to hear more and more companies talking about this, is the menopause. Which, because women have health needs, their hormones are changing, but also the impact on families. So it was really great to hear in the last week or so certain companies talking about how they're also raising this issue of menopause. And it's a whole layer of different things, isn't it? But I think man or woman, able-bodied, not able-bodied, whether you, depending on your mental health, these are just good business practices to me that organisations need to look at and think about their flexibility, how people are managed, how the conversations are managed while those people are off work, even if it's a couple of days or a week, because by the time you've been off work for a certain amount of months, you're more likely to die than come back to work. That's an official statistic. Wow. So we need to think about this, because we're writing people off. That shouldn't be written off. One of my friends, you were talking about women returners, one of my friends had her twins. She had a daughter, then a bit of a gap, then she had twins, and one of them has Down syndrome, so obviously there was a lot of care involved in the first couple of years. But he's doing really well, and O2 got back in touch with her and said, we are looking for returners. And she'd worked at a very senior level. She'd actually worked at account director above in the States as well as here. So she was really skilled and had done some very big accounts. But she, only the week or so before they contacted her, was looking at doing teaching assistant work in schools because she wanted to go back. And now she's just been to Europe and negotiated a multi-million-pound deal. So she's back at work, and it was her choice to be off for the first years. And twins anyway is challenging, having 3 children, and then one with Down syndrome. But she's an active campaigner about Downs and raising awareness of what that is, and organising groups, and doing this very high-level role. And I'm so proud of her, because women like her show that things are possible, and that women don't lose the brain when they have a child. But from my side, I want to say I don't have children. I never have. It's not that I haven't wanted them, But those assumptions that are made at work, I'm fortunate actually that I didn't have that. Throughout those 30s, I had a female chief exec who treated everyone as an individual, and she was fantastic. In fact, she went a bit far the other way sometimes, because she rang me up once, and she rang the office, and she said, "Why are you at work?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "It's Diwali, which is the festival of lights." And I'm not particularly religious, but I do. It's like our New Year, you know. I follow the main ones. But still, you do stuff in the evening. Why would I take the day off work? So that was goodwill, but really, you know, meet people at where they're at, because we've all got slightly different perspectives of looking at things and the way we show up in the world.
I mean, I agree. It's kind of hard to have one size fits all in anything in life, you know, in clothes, in shoes, in anything. And I don't. That translates even on a business level. You cannot have sort of the same rules for everybody. We all so diverse, so different. I mean, you did mention even in your own family. We all have different. We are very different anyway. So it has to be something that's looked at on an organizational level. You know, if they're going out actively recruiting people from ethnic minority backgrounds, it has to be, like you said, it's not a tick box exercise. It's not just to meet a business goal. Yes, we've done it. We've got one person and that's it. We've got a woman, she's ethnic minority. It's got to be a drive from, you know, leadership trickling all the way down into middle management.
So that's the right skills are brought in. Nobody wants to think, "Oh, I've been brought in because I am an ethnic minority, or I am a woman, or I have a disability." It has to be about talent, but also enabling that talent to come in the first place. So, for example, quotas are something I've got very mixed views on, because in general, if everything were equal, I wouldn't agree with quotas. But they're not, and in some sectors, like the ones we've talked about, maybe they're needed or positive action initiatives are needed just to start changing the behaviour. Because once people are in, they realise, oh, that one isn't so difficult, or they're just a person. Because when we engage at a very human level, when we're one-to-one and we're talking to each other and we're working with each other, we realise that fundamentally we've all got hopes and dreams and fears and worries and challenges in our lives that aren't dissimilar. There are some things that are completely universal.
I mean, I agree. I agree. I think it's a case of being heard. I think one of the things we talked about last time was when you said we need to speak up. You know, we need to, like you said, speak up for yourself. I think you called them your speak ups. Is that what you call them?
So it's speak up for yourself, speak up for others, speak up for social issues. And I do feel that's quite a journey, because until you're empowered to speak up for yourself and resilient and have that voice, it's difficult to advocate on behalf of others. Sometimes we do, actually, because our love for someone or our passion about something enables us to speak up. And actually, in some area of our life, we don't. We stay quiet, maybe with a partner or a bullying boss or something like that. So it's not as straightforward, and you have to give that support wherever it's needed. But having a voice, we cannot stay in victim status. We need to be able to do that and band together to support. And actually, I saw some really interesting research. It's a book by Rebecca Solnit, who's a fantastic feminist writer. And in this research, it was by UCLA, I think. They'd done a study and they'd looked at fight or flight. And what they were saying was, when rats or males, and most of the early studies about fight or flight were done initially on animals and then on men, their reaction was fight or flight. But actually, in newer research, when it comes to women, what they've seen is they band together. They come together. So, you know, when we think about networks, gender networks or something, that's very interesting, because it's not us against them. It should never be that. We need allies too. And I always bring men into this equation, because we can't it's complaint. If we're just speaking up all the time and we don't have the help of other gender, all genders, to amplify those voices, it sounds like complaining, and it's noise, and it doesn't really get heard. But when I've got so many amazing men in my networks that have helped, and whether it's been the FGM campaigning or things like Me Too, even on LinkedIn right now. A friend of mine started a thread. She's a law firm owner, and she started this thread about the whole Me Too and Press for Progress. And she was asking about what the most outrageous comments are that have been said to you. And I've just shared one which was really shocking. And children might be watching this at some point, so I'm not going to say what it was. But someone I went to school with, who I'm connected with on LinkedIn, he wrote, "I can't believe that the majority would agree with this." And I said, well, one would hope not. But I said, the regularity in every single job. I said, this is the most outrageous comment, but in terms of behaviour, I've had a lot worse. And this is why it's my personal mission to speak up and help other women. Because we had a lawyer yesterday who was talking about some stats. And in fact, I think I have them on my phone, so I'll see if I can get them for you. But the stats were very shocking. On the surface shocking, but I wasn't really shocked because I've done enough research about this. But what she said was that 80% of them were not reported. And you just think, how this is about cultures, company cultures, about keeping things safe so that we feel we are able to speak up in an environment and not lose our job or not be bullied out of that job. So her title, it was Trade Union Congress, TUC findings. 52% of women polled experienced some form of sexual harassment. So this is the women that admitted it. 35% of women overheard comments of the sexual nature. 32% was subjected to jokes of the sexual nature. 28% had sexual comments about their body or clothes. 25% had unwanted touching. 20% experienced unwanted sexual advances. So she asked us to put our hands up if we had something. I put my hand up. I've had every single one of those. Every single one. It's I'm sure a lot of us have. I think there was only one woman in that room of about 65 that hadn't.
Wow.
Yeah. As far as I could see, I did a quick look around the room, and everybody around me, some women were in the 60s, some were in the 20s,
It's a shocking statistic, but I think what it tells me as well is there's so many unreported cases. And one of the things that I'm very, very passionate about is mentoring, because part of mentoring can, especially our young girls, and we spoke about this last time. I've got a 15-year-old niece. This is the point where she's going to go out into the world in a couple of years and maybe work. And she'll face some of these things. And mentoring can play a huge part in just telling them what to expect professionally and also on a personal level. And I think that's one of the strategic things that we should probably look into.
I completely agree. And do you know what was great yesterday at this event I went to? They had Johnny Mitchell, who was the head teacher on Educating Yorkshire. He's now head of the Co-op Academy in Leeds. And he had nearly 2 tables of his students, male and female, aged around 15. They're hearing our stories and listening and asking questions. And that's a powerful thing for young people to hear and understand. And I'm so glad that it was boys as well as girls in that room, because they're the ones that are growing up as our future, modelling these behaviours in our workplace. So it's so important to catch it young as possible, really. And I feel that responsibility as an auntie. I haven't got kids, but very actively involved auntie, and for my friends' children. And that, my nephew, one of my nephews, 23, he's a dentist. He lives in York at the moment, came to see us yesterday. And his first question is, what are you working on, auntie? And he wants to know, he's my biggest cheerleader, interested in the awards and how that worked. Was asking about the Changemaker weekend that I led this weekend, wanted to know what was discussed. His sister, they're almost like twins. My niece Monica's only 11 months older. And they're so close. And the way they respect and look out for each other, but him and his female friendships as well. This is, we need to start modelling these behaviours quite young and nipping any inappropriate comments in the bud as they come up.
I agree. I mean, I've got 2 boys,
Yeah.
so they don't stand a chance with me. I have to talk to them about these issues.
Yeah.
Because obviously, at the end of the day, they will eventually leave home and have their own families. And if we, like you're saying, if we start early, and then
it's
that will become
creating good fathers as well. You know, good colleagues and good fathers. I'm one of 6. I've got a younger brother, and great dad. He's got 2 boys. But you know, my hope is that he will teach those boys who are 3 and 7 how to be a good and respectful dad.
Yeah. So to sum up, Anj, we say that Press for Progress tomorrow is all about getting together as women, celebrating all our differences, our diverse differences, whether it's biological, cultural, and the progress that's been made, because there is some progress anyway, if you think about it. There is some progress, but it's to keep going as well.
There is, and that's why I share stories through Igniting Inspiration, which is my on and offline campaign to celebrate women change makers. So it's starting again from tomorrow. I'm opening nominations, and I've added a young change maker category. So for young women who was 17 to 25, I felt it was really important to add them. This will be the 2nd year. Every single story is shared, and for me that's enabling those connections just to spread out wider. You never know who will see what it is you're doing and want to join in and support you, or has a contact that could help you. And
that's really good. That's really good.
I've been struggling this whole chat because I think I have hay fever, and I don't know how that is possible. So all of this, celebrating the story, sharing the story. So if I have one call to action, it's celebrate all those women, put them forward, let me amplify their voices by sharing their stories. It's on the website, which is www.inspiringwomenchangemakers.co.uk, and I'll drop that in the links under the video as well. Fantastic.
That's great.
Thanks, Lucy. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
See you.
See ya.